Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jenny Parks. This is our summer M-SARA webinar called How to Become an Approved SARA Institution. Currently, I see that there are about 375 folks logged on. I think we had a registration of about 577. So I'll get through the first few minutes of this presentation, and hopefully a few more people will go ahead and join us soon. First thing I always like to do is thank our sponsor. We are funded at the nationwide and at the regional level for this initiative by the Lumina Foundation, and they have funded us generously for 2 years to launch this very important effort in state authorization reciprocity. I'm also being helped today by a couple of people here. Mary Robertson always sets up all of our webinars and makes them look pretty and function smoothly, so you have her to thank for bringing this to us today. Then we also have Emily Jacobson, the coordinator here at Midwestern SARA. She's the one who helps me with all the content and all the outreach and making sure that the right people are on the phone and get all the invitations. We also have some co-presenters today. We have Ross Miller, who is the Director of State Authorization at the Indiana Commission for Higher Education, and he is going to be telling us a little bit about the Indiana process. And we were supposed to have Tanya Spilovoy from the Portal Agency in North Dakota, but it seems Tanya has been called away to an urgent meeting there. She might be joining us a little bit later. She's going to tell us a little bit, hopefully, about the North Dakota process, and if she's unavailable, I will do that for her. We're also being joined by Lisa Greco, the Communications Coordinator at National SARA. She's the one who handles the institutional application process. Once you are accepted by your state portal agency, then you do have some work you have to do with the national office to get on the National SARA list, and she's going to go through the procedure for that. All right. Then finally, throughout the presentation, we're also going to have someone else from National SARA. We have Alan Contreras, who is the SARA coordinator and the interim director of Western SARA. He will be answering your chat questions. You notice that your chat options are in the lower left-hand corner of this webinar. And Alan will be responding to those, and then at the last quarter of the presentation will be one where everyone is able to be on the line and answer questions verbally. So thank you to all my co-presenters, and of course there's me. You're all getting used to seeing me by now. I am Jenny Parks. I'm the director of the Midwestern State Authorization Reciprocity Agreement, and I am the main one who you'll be hearing from today. So let's go ahead and get started on getting ready for this webinar. We have almost 400 people now. I wanted to let you know, for those of you who are repeat visitors to our series of webinars on SARA and state authorization, that we do use the information you provide to us at the end when you fill out your evaluation. Just so you know, the last webinar that was in April, we did get an overall satisfaction rating of 4.28 out of 5.0, but it's our goal to get as close to 5 as possible. The topic that for future seminars and webinars that was most requested was SARA, so obviously we are right on point here with SARA institutional application procedures. The most useful information that was offered apparently during that webinar, according to most people, was about state authorization itself. So, of course, there are going to be some changes coming with federal rulemaking this summer, and we will probably do a follow-up state authorization update in the fall. And then the most requested improvements were to logistics, so we have made some improvements there. Let's take a look at that next slide, and I will point you directly to the things that you had asked me to do, which was to make the presentation shorter and to go more slowly. So I hope that's already evident that I'm doing that. You wanted the PowerPoint slides posted ahead of time, and indeed they were this time. And also, we need to remind you they will be posted to our website and will be available on YouTube by the end of the week. The chat questions, just as a reminder, we don't have verbal chat, we have text chat, and that any questions that we don't get answered in the webinar itself will come back to you in the form of a document within 48 hours. That's always how we handle that. And of course, you all asked that I put fewer words on the slides and more graphics. So I have made that attempt while still hoping to provide you with slides that you can go back to and get information from. I apologize in advance. You'll notice a big difference between my slide and Lisa's slides. Lisa's are always beautiful and elegant, and mine look less so. So here we go. Let's look at the structure of the webinar. We have 60 minutes today. Part 1 is going to be a quick SARA overview and an implementation timeline. I'll be presenting that to you. The second part will be a walk through the state application process. Part 3 will be information about the submission, review, acceptance, and payment processes. And then, of course, as I've alluded to previously, we will try to have 15 minutes of questions and answers. All right, so let's dive in. We have 413 people on board. Sounds pretty good. So, Part 1. We have a quick SARA overview and implementation timeline. All right. Well, just as a reminder to those of you, I don't think most of you are new to SARA, but it's always good to remind you of the key elements of SARA, what we're trying to uphold, what we're trying to further, what we're trying to improve, which of course is institutional academic integrity, institutional financial responsibility. We're trying to streamline and unify and make consistent triggers for physical presence across the nation. We're trying to have a consistent and a more effective system for complaint processing. We want to do some data collection and sharing so we know a lot more about online education in this nation. And of course, we want accountability in the case of an institutional catastrophe or a precipitous closure. So one of the things that there's a lot of, another point where I want to make sure that we're all up to speed with SARA is thinking about all the stages a state and an institution has to go through before joining SARA. And there is some confusion there. So I'm going to go, I've broken it down into 4 stages, which I hope make it a lot more understandable for folks. So stage one is where a state has to get the legal ability to join one of the regional SARA agreements. And this is where we do get some confusion. We have some very eager people out there in states that have not joined SARA yet. They email Emily and us saying, hey, I've got my application done. How do I submit it? And then I'm really very sad always to have to go back and say, you can't do anything until your state joins. So just so you know, we now have 7 member SARA states, and we estimate that we will have 20 to 24 states that will have joined the various SARA agreements by the end of 2014, and we'll have 40 to 45 states by the end of 2015. If we go to the next slide, I'll show you where you can get the most up-to-date information on what those states are and what their activities are. If you go to this link at the NC SARA website, you'll be able to see a document that looks like the one I have snipped and posted there for you. And it will let you know where legislation has been introduced, where it's been passed, and then indeed if they've submitted an application to their regional compact and if they've been approved. So that is stage 1. Unfortunately, an institution cannot do anything until its state has been approved. Now, okay, it can't apply, but institutions are key players in helping legislation get drafted and passed in their states. So please don't think if your state has not joined that you do not have a role. You absolutely do. Your voice is key to getting SARA introduced and passed in your state. Okay, stage 2. Let's say you've got your law passed or you already have existing laws that allow your state to join SARA. Your state then must set up what's called a state portal agency. We refer to it affectionately as the SPA. And it has to create the regulations, the rules, and all of the procedures by which it carries out its SARA duties. In many of the states, they do this by using an existing SHIO office and expanding its powers, or another existing office. And in some states, they're even looking at new types of agencies or councils. There are various ways that it happens. But again, you have to have a designated portal agency, and it needs to be able to do its SARA duties. So let me give you some examples of existing SPAs, SARA portal agencies. The first one to join and get up and running was the Indiana Commission for Higher Education. And you'll note that link that I've provided right there is the one that you would go to if you were an Indiana institution and you wanted to find out how to join SARA, because you guys are eligible now that Indiana has a functioning SPA and is a SARA member state. Likewise, same goes for North Dakota. They have a functioning state portal agency, and you would find out what you needed to do in North Dakota by going to the link that you see right there. Okay, so let's assume that your state has the ability to join, and it has a portal agency. The stage 3 of SARA participation is that the state would have to submit an application to its regional compact and be approved for membership. And again, we have 2 states approved in the Midwest, Indiana and North Dakota, with several others coming on board this summer, the next 2 likely to be Nebraska and Kansas. And WICHE has 5 states that have already come on board, and you will hear which ones those are in a little while. So if you want an update of which states have already joined, you can go to this link at the NC SARA website. You can see that on the map, which Lisa Greco maintains beautifully, she also maintains that other list that we referred to earlier of state activity and progress towards SARA membership. This is where you look, and she updates it very, very quickly. So it is really the best place to go if you want to know which states have already joined. Okay, so then stage 4. That's when the institution can apply to their SPAs and become participating SARA institutions. So if you want to see examples of institutions that have already done this, we'll go to the next slide. And you can go to this link at the NC SARA website. Actually, if you go to the map that we were looking at before and you click on any state, you'll be able to see the institutions that have already applied and successfully gone through the entire process to become participant institutions. So this is an example of what it would look like when you do get to that page on the website. All right, let's keep moving on our SARA overview. The estimated timeline for a lot of these things happening in the Midwestern SPAs are this: Indiana and North Dakota, obviously, already taking applications. Illinois, Kansas, Minnesota, and Nebraska should all be taking applications by this fall. Iowa, Missouri, and Michigan and Ohio in early to mid 2015. We also have a little bit of information on the western states. Of the 5 that have been admitted, Idaho and Nevada are already taking applications. Alaska, Colorado, and Washington should be taking applications this July. So hopefully that gives you a quick update on where we are on SARA so that we can now get to the meat of the presentation, which is a walk through the institutional application process. I will look for some love here on my use of graphics. It's not only an application, but it's walking. So there you go. As to those of you who said we need more illustrative graphics, I am trying. All right, so let's go. First of all, you got to find out where do I get an application? Because we've had a number of people contact us and say we want to join, we want to do it, we don't know where it is. Well, there are 3 places you can find the SARA institutional application. The first one is on the NC SARA website at the link I've given you right there. And when you go there, it looks just like that. And where I put the little red arrow, that would actually be where you would click. You can also get it, we'll look at the next slide, on your regional compact websites. In the SARA part of any of their websites, you will also be able to get the application, and it's linked back to the national application, so they are identical. But sometimes, if you happen to be on that other website for any other reason, that's a better place for you to find it. And then finally, you can get the application at your state portal agency website. So here's an example from North Dakota. I know it's hard to read, but I wanted you to see what it looks like. Again, it's linked to the NC SARA application, so it will look the same, all but a few portions. And I'm going to explain that to you in just a moment. Okay, so let's say you go to one of these places, your state's approved, you want to become a SARA institution, you go to one of these 3 locations, and you click on the application. This is what it should look like when you pull it up. This will be the front page of it. It is a fillable PDF, and you can submit it by paper, by fax, by mail, or online. Please note that you can also do electronic signatures. So we're trying to make it as easy for you and give you as many choices of ways to submit it as possible. You can see that you have a choice up top of which regional compact you're going to be applying under. And then you begin to see the items that are a part of the entire application. Important to note here is that parts of the application, most of the application is the same for every institution everywhere, but there are a few places where states will individualize the requirements that they have. Our next slide will show us that. I've tried to break it down so that it makes it a little more understandable. So we got two columns there. What's the same for all states and what is different by state? Well, if you have the copy of the application that you're looking at right now, you'll notice that there's only one place where a state can fill in anything that's different, and that's on page 8, and we will get to those in a little while. I wanted to start with what's the same in all states, and that really can be divided into two sets of categories, items 1, 2, and 3, and those are the items on the application that require documentation and attachment. And then there's the rest of the application, which requires affirmation and a signature from either a chief academic officer or a CEO, chief executive officer, the highest level of governance and oversight at the organization. So let's dive in. Item number 1. Now this is one of those that's the same for everybody everywhere and requires documentation. And it is a very understandable and basic requirement. We really have to know where the institution is domiciled. If for any reason your institution might be registered, chartered, have its OPE ID number, or any articles of incorporation in a state that is not a SARA member, you can't become a member. So the very first thing we need to do is document that. I've given you a link there for where you can look up your OPE ID number and where it's registered. If that is not something that you know how to do, and that might seem like a rudimentary question, but a lot of the people who will end up doing this application or who have been handed the task of state authorization at their institutions don't have a background with institutional research or Title IV funds, so they need to know what that OPE ID number is and where they find it. That OPE ID number, for those of you who don't know, is your official identifier from the Federal Department of Education that is part of the package that you got when you applied for and became eligible to offer Title IV funds. All right, so that's item number 1. You have to attach that document. Notice my graphics. It's got the little documents there. So there you go. There's your reminder. Item number 2, again, it's the same for everyone and does require a document. We need your letter of accreditation. Remember, in order to be a SARA participating school, you have to be degree granting and you have to be accredited. Now, you can be regionally or nationally accredited, but you have to attach that letter from your accreditor. For a list of accreditors and accredited institutions in the United States, go to this particular link that I've given you right there. All right, and then item number 3, the last one requiring documentation and attachment. Again, it's the same for everyone and requires some documentation. The first piece is we have to know that the institutions that we are admitting to the SARA network are financially able to continue to do their work. They have a certain level of financial responsibility that makes them not risky for us to embrace and to certify to our students they meet all the guidelines. One of the ways that the U.S. government ranks you or evaluates your institution is to give you a financial responsibility score. You are eligible for SARA participation with a score of a 1.5. Or you can also attach documentation that would support your argument that you are financially stable and responsible if you have a score of 1.0 to 1.49. And that is one of the things that will vary by the states. And again, we will get back to that. Now, if you're a public institution, a technical college, a community college, a public university, or college, you do not have to submit. All you have to do is say that you're a public institution. It is assumed under SARA guidelines and policy that public institutions are indemnified and financially responsible with the backing of their states. So it is only private institutions that need to provide this documentation on the application. If you want to look up your financial responsibility score, the last year for which they do have composite scores is 2012, and you can use this link here. And so when we get to the part of this application walkthrough where we discuss what you do if you have a score of a 1.0 to a 1.49, we will talk a little bit more about that. But for right now, I'm actually going to go and have Ross Miller, who actually deals with applications by proprietary schools in Indiana and have Ross tell us a little bit about their process. He'll be talking to us in a little while, but I thought after the very first 3 items, Ross could just tell us a little bit about having seen some of that documentation and give you any pointers he might have.
Yes, thank you, Jenny. One of the things that we do look at is the financial responsibility score. I'm finding that most institutions are 1.5 or higher. They do vary greatly, and I found it interesting that some of the institutions like Notre Dame may have a lower score than even a cosmetology school. So some of the scores are rather interesting, but for the most part, we are finding 1.5 or higher.
Thanks, Ross. Okay, Tanya, you've joined us, haven't you?
I have.
Yes. Tanya, do you want to tell us a little bit about financial responsibility scores and North Dakota?
Yeah, right now, so far the only institutions that have joined in North Dakota are the public institutions, so we haven't had to dig a whole lot deeper into the 1.5 review. But the institutions who are out there right now are able to provide that kind of information. So there hasn't been a huge concern on my side for institutions that are financially viable joining SARA in North Dakota. So probably when I look at Ross, I'm glad he's doing his due diligence so that when our 2 states come together in the middle, we both know that both of the SARA portal agencies are doing their job to ensure that institutions are financially stable.
Thank you, Tanya. I'm wondering, Alan, if you had any comments on this particular topic you wanted to make right now.
No, not right now. Thanks.
All right. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on to other items in the application now. Okay, on to item 4. Okay, so we're still in, excuse me, what's the same, but this time it's not what requires documentation, it's what requires executive level affirmation. And notice, again, I'm very proud of my 6th grade graphics here. The hand is signing the document this time. You're not just submitting it. And every slide where the hand is signing the document, that will remind you that it has to be signed by a provost, a chancellor, a president, that highest level of leadership at the university. They have to say, yes, we affirmatively assert that we are in compliance with these aspects of the SARA application at the institutional level. So one of the biggest pieces is adherence to what are called the C-RAC guidelines. And the C-RAC guidelines, that is short for the Interregional Guidelines for the Evaluation of Distance Education, coming from the Council of Regional Accrediting Commissions. And they are attached, they are pages 4 through 7 of the application that you would have received as part of your email here, and that, again, I pointed you to where you can find it. Now, nicely, for those of you who are already regionally accredited, you already adhere to these. This is already part of your accreditation package. So as you're going to apply to SARA, really all you have to do is kind of pull out that part of your accreditation work and update it and verify it. Because again, if it's been 7 years and you're up for reaccreditation soon, a lot of things have changed in online and distance education in the last 7 years, depending on the cycle with which you do update these things. But you would want to update and verify that you adhere to the guidelines. And you want to make sure that the signatory agent who will be signing your document is aware of these guidelines. A lot of times the highest level executive officers, understandably and properly so, don't know all of the minutiae or even aware of some of the finer points of accreditation adherence. But in this case, they at least have to know what they are and know that someone is affirmatively and assertively making sure that the institution is adhering to the guidelines. So that's a very important piece, and it's really something new about SARA, where we're asking that highest level of institutional management to know about and sign off on these. Okay, something else, the next slide also addresses the issue of the C-RAC guidelines. If you are nationally accredited, Most national accreditors are not required to adhere to C-RAC guidelines, but many do. So again, you'd want to check for in your particular accreditor to see, and again, you would just follow the steps I just outlined for those that are regionally accredited. However, if you you might already have practices that adhere to the C-RAC guidelines. You just need to go through and document those and verify that. But regardless, you would want to start now of preparing, documenting, and establishing your adherence to the C-RAC guidelines if you know you want to join SARA. I would even say, if you're going to be in Kansas or Nebraska and we won't be able to accept those applications for a couple of months, or even Missouri where we'll accept them later in the fall, if you have any questions about this, now is the time to clean that stuff up and get it ready, because you can submit that application then the day the portal agency opens. Now, this is really important. People get very confused about this. There is no documentation required with a SARA application to document your adherence. However, it could be required of you in the case of a complaint investigation. And we'll deal more with complaints later. But you are not submitting any of these plans with your SARA application. That's one of the biggest questions we get. So again, this is an affirmation, not an attachment. Okay, let's go to the next item. A little bit more about the C-RAC guidelines. When you look at them, they can seem daunting. I've had a lot of people ask me, am I supposed to do every one of these bullet points and document all of these? And the answer is no. The guidelines, there are 9 guidelines, and there are bulleted examples under each one. That gives you an idea of how you would be able to say, oh yeah, we do that, or oh yeah, we could do that, or maybe we should do that. Those are just examples. They're only the 9 guidelines that you need to adhere to. So again, don't want you to panic when you look at the application. We've tried to make it very efficient and streamlined and elegant. Okay, on to item 5. You have to have your signatory agent sign that you will be responsible for the actions of any third-party providers, and there are a number of those in the online and distance education world. All right, on to item 6. You have to notify your state or SARA portal agency of any changes to your accreditation status. Actually, in the application it says any negative changes, but obviously if you had a negative status and it approved, you probably want to let them know that as well. So I've just summarized it here to say notify your SPA of any changes in your accreditation status. All right, next. All right, something else that's the same, requires that executive level affirmation again. Notice the little hand signing the paper, is that you will be providing data to your SPA and to NC SARA. Now the data was just, the scope of the data collection was endorsed by the National Council on SARA at their semi-annual meeting in Chicago on May 14th. And the scope, and by scope I mean minimal, not redundant, and very goal-oriented. And the goals of collecting data for SARA are really these. We want to know more about what is happening, how many people from how many states, in which fields, what is happening with online and distance education in this nation, because we don't have that information from any other source, and it will be very helpful to policymakers and institutional leaders to know what's going on, how much is going on, and who people are and where they are. And then also to know if SARA is having an impact. We need a metric by which we can gauge if the agreement and the organization is effective. So it's goal-oriented, and it's a minimal scope of data. The working recommendation is that we would be gathering from institutions the number of online students that are out of state and by the states. So that is the beginnings of the data that we would be collecting, and we would be looking in 1 to 2 years also to add to that which programs those students are in. Once again, finding out how many nursing students are crossing state lines to get their licenses and to get their degrees, how many teachers, how many MBAs, etc. So that is what we are looking at and will eventually be collecting from institutions, and that data would go straight to NC SARA. We also will be looking to gather from the portal agencies the number and category of complaints that rise above the institutional level. One of the important things to remember is that we are trying to make sure that students who live in one state and attend school in another state don't fall into the cracks of, well, it doesn't fall under the jurisdiction of this of this particular Attorney General, and it doesn't fall under the laws of that state, one of the things we're trying to do is connect those and have other ways to resolve complaints. That being said, we anticipate that 99% of all complaints will do what they've always done, which is go through the institutional level and stop there. Only on a very rare occasion would it rise to the level of a state portal agency. But we would want to know the number and category of those so that we could be looking for any types of patterns in ways that, again, this national system of higher education online and distance education might be able to be improved. So one of the things that we are waiting on is more specific definitions of the data, like which iPad field are you going to submit for certain things, the cycle on which we collect the data, and other types of details that are very logistical that way. We do have a data and complaints working group at NC SARA, and I do believe our next meeting is next month in Boulder. So look for more information on that. I would, of course, make that part of my fall SARA update. Okay, on to item 8. You have to, again, your signatory agent has to agree to work with the state portal agency to resolve complaints from online students coming from other SARA states. And again, I've mentioned a few things about complaints previously. Very few will rise above the institutional complaint process. And 2 types of complaints are prohibited from rising above the institutional level, and those would be student grade disputes and conduct disputes. So item 9. You agree that all of these terms are based on and they're over the signature of the CEO or the CAO, the Chief Executive Officer or the Chief Academic Officer. All right, item 10, please. You agree to notify all students in writing about whether your institution's programs in areas leading to professional licensure are known or not known to meet the licensure requirements of the student's state of residence. And this is a big leap forward because there are no real regulations on how states do or don't let students know. Well, so let's say I'm in Indiana and I'm taking a nursing course in North Dakota and I'm trying to become a nurse. Well, the North Dakota institution would need to tell me one of 2 things. Either our program has looked into licensure of nurses in Indiana and our program meets those requirements and you would be able to sit for licensure in Indiana, or we don't know if it meets those requirements, and that might be because we tried to find that out and couldn't, or because we don't meet those requirements. But again, you have to affirmatively get that information out there at a first level of information to the students. It can't be embedded 4 or 5 clicks deep or on the back page of a brochure somewhere. It has to be prominent information that is offered to students so that they know if they are seeking professional licensure in the state in which they reside, but not the state in which they are seeking their education, that excuse me, the school has to be right up front with them about that. Item 10, very important. All right, item 11, please. You have to agree to provide an alternative or financial compensation to students if an institution cannot deliver the instruction for which the student has contracted. And generally what we mean by this is some type of precipitous closing or other catastrophic event. We think about some of the schools that were damaged and wiped out in Hurricane Katrina, some that have recently this spring been heavily damaged by the tornadoes, or those that end up being bought out by another school or have some type of bankruptcy, etc. The basic components that you need to make sure you have in place are a plan for where the student records go, a teach-out plan for those students, where else would they go to finish their program, and in the event that the teach-out plan doesn't work or someone else doesn't have your records, you have some financial resources available to the students to help get them back on track and compensate them for what they've lost. And the first 2, student records plans and teach-out plans, are actually part of regional accreditation requirements. So again, you can just go back to those and make sure they're updated and good to go, and that your chief executive or academic officer is familiar with the fact that you have those plans. Many institutions have very good disaster planning, and they also have closure planning, but many do not. In fact, I was just attending the NASASP conference in Little Rock in April, and we had a number of presentations from basically their cleanup teams. They go in after an institution does have a precipitous closing, and it is alarming the number of institutions that really don't have these things in place. So That's really important. And the financial planning is also important because there are going to be those times when, despite your best efforts, you're not going to be able to do everything for the student without some type of financial backup plan. Okay, item 12. You're going to have to pay your annual SARA fees, and we'll talk a little bit later about that, but we're just talking right now about agreeing to pay the fees, and Lisa will walk us through the process by which you pay them. The fees currently are based on your total enrollment at the institution, and that is your IPED FTE number. If you have fewer than 2,500 students, it will be $2,000 a year. If you have between 2,500 and 10,000, it will be $4,000 a year. And if you have over 10,000 students, it will be $6,000 a year. Item 13, you have to agree to pay state fees. And those are going to vary by state, and we'll talk about those in a moment. I have some states I know that have no fees. That would currently be Indiana and North Dakota. They are not charging any SARA fees. But I do have states that are saying they're going to charge fees that are exactly parallel to the ones charged by NC SARA. And that really does depend on the level of oversight, the level of complexity at the state level, how much funding and where they get their funding for what will be their portal agency. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the state fees. There are various models, as I've already discussed. So again, depending on the state you're in, you're going to have to know those up front, and you would pay that state fee with your application to your portal agency. Another thing that's going to vary by states is going to be this next item, surety bonds. In most states already, it is required of private proprietary or for-profit schools to post a surety bond to become licensed, authorized, etc., in the state in which they operate, in which they're domiciled, and in other states, but not in all states. One of the things that the surety bond allows you to do is to buy some insurance just for the purposes we've discussed, whether to address a student complaint that might require financial compensation or a precipitous or catastrophic event. Surety bonds are calculated in all kinds of ways, and in some states, all private institutions have to post surety bonds. The different states, as they decide how to take on the risk of greater numbers of students coming into being served by institutions in their states, are going to be making some decisions about surety bonding that might expand the number and types of institutions that seek surety bonds, and they might increase the risk and change the calculations for surety bonds. And again, we can hear a little bit about that from Ross and Tanya in a few minutes. Okay, so the third thing that is then different about applications by state is, and we've already discussed this a little bit, is the financial responsibility scores. And again, I have seen a whole range of approaches to this. I've talked to states that said, you know, they're very reticent to accept any school that's under a 1.5. I have some states that say, hey, we'll take them at a 1.0 without additional documentation as long as they still are eligible for Title IV funds. If it's good enough for the feds, it's good enough for us. So there really is a range on how the states are going to be handling this. So at this point, I am going to have our two portal agents, Tanya and Ross, go ahead and talk to us, and we'll start with Tanya.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to go through the process of what it looks like to apply to the North Dakota SARA Portal Agency. When I first receive your application, which I have institutions fill out the regular NC SARA application, and it's a paper form. You just mail it to my office. And I review that you've checked all the boxes, that you have the right signature, that everything looks neat and tidy on the application. And then you'll receive an email to your executive officer. I think that when the executive officer takes time to talk about distance education and state authorization, we should all celebrate, because in the past, many of the top officials in institutions didn't even know that state authorization was happening constantly on their campus. And so this is a really big step, I think, for many institutions, that it's making everyone aware of what an important step it is to be authorized in states, and also that you've taken the time to join the SARA agreement, which is a game changer for higher ed. And so after that, I send you that email with payment information, links to the SARA portal agency in North Dakota, and also the NC SARA website so that you can see your name listed, which is always exciting for institutions. Also links to the SARA complaint process portal agency in North Dakota so that students have a place to complain if there are any problems, and ask you to make that very prominent in your information and website. And you'll also need to publish your own institution's complaint process, make sure that's very clear, and also links to your accreditation agency complaint processes. And once that's all complete, it really is quite a simple process, and I really have been able to work closely with institutions and quickly, and so I think most institutions have found this a rather painless and collaborative process.
Thank you, Tanya. Okay, Ross, would you take us through a similar summary of what happens once an institution submits an application in Indiana, please?
Yes, thank you, Jenny. I just want to start out by saying Indiana does not require an institutional surety bond. And in regards to the application, some of the things that we look at, we first look it over for accuracy, of course. We also look at the accreditation of the institution and verify with the accrediting agency that's been noted within the application. Consistent with SARA policy, of course, as I stated earlier, we look at the institution's federal financial aid composite score, which is also known as the federal financial responsibility rating. We look at the institution's enrollment figures, and we also review any complaints against the institution that we have received in the past. And then finally, we look at any outside information that might be relevant to the institution.
Thank you, Ross. All right, so that gives you an idea of two portal agencies and what you can expect with them. As we have more come online, I will add that, and in subsequent webinars we'll feature different portals in our newsletters and in our webinars. So I'm hoping that as more come online, I can serve a wider group of audience members who might be applying in other states. Okay. So now we're moving on to stay on target for, in fact, we're running a little bit slow, so I'm gonna get on to part 3. This is where Lisa Greco is going to walk us through what happens once Ross or Tanya or your other portal agent says, yep, your application is good to go. I'm going to send you this link, and now you have to get all official with NC SARA. I'm going to let Lisa walk us through that process.
Thank you, Jenny. I just have a few slides to clarify the final steps in the process. Again, just like Jenny said, once the state portal agency approves an institution, they will send a link to the payment form, and the institution needs to fill out that form. And here is a, let's see if I can control that. Yes, here is a sample of what that form looks like on our site. And once that form is submitted, the institution will receive an email with confirmation from NC SARA and payment details. And then after that, in the process, once the payment is received by NC SARA, the institution is officially participating in SARA. And then that's when we will list the institution on the website. And also to clarify, a lot of you have heard about our grand opening sale for 18 months. That's for institutions joining by September 1st. And the 18 months starts when payment has been received from those institutions. And there's one final step. Also, when payment is received, NC SARA will send a welcome letter to institutions that will give them access to the SARA institution logos, so they can promote it on their website. And this is a sample of the letter you'll get, and then the two logos. There's also a white version of this one, or a reversed out version for sites with a dark background. And that's basically it. I've added a simple graphic to our website with this information, just again to clarify the process.
Thank you, Lisa. That is great information. Yes, we will be posting the graphic, the flow chart of that process with all of our materials and sending them out as well. And thank you, Ross and Tanya. Okay, so now we're on to part 4. We made it pretty much. It's 1:46, so we have 15 minutes for questions and answers. And as I've been watching here, we've had a lot of chat and a lot of questions, but I have not been able, while I've been speaking, to monitor which ones are still needing to be addressed. So from our folks here, what's a question that we've got that we need to, oh, there we go. Okay. Emily's showing me where to get to the questions. So I'm just going to start reading them here and seeing which ones we can get through. My co-presenters, please jump on if you have something to add or clarify. Okay. We have a question. Where is the Ohio Board of Regents in the process of signing on to SARA? The Ohio Board of Regents is very supportive. It is just going, the SARA bill is in the final stages of the legislative process there. I work closely with the Ohio Board of Regents to make sure that the portal agency can likely submit an application to SARA in the fall, and they're thinking they would be able to take institutional applications by January 1st. Do I have any updates on whether the Ohio State Legislature has voted? Well, I don't right this moment. The last time I checked was early last week, so I can get back to you on that. Another question. If a state is not yet a part of the agreement, can other states begin offering courses within that state? Not under SARA. They can still offer those courses, of course, as they have through the traditional authorization process, but no, they cannot. Now, interestingly, the state can become a member. And there, let's say Ohio submits its application in the fall, but doesn't take institutional applications from Ohio institutions until January. As soon as Ohio becomes a SARA state, then North Dakota, Indiana, and the other SARA states can offer SARA courses to students in Ohio under the SARA agreement, though. Is the PowerPoint ahead of the speaker? Maybe. Yes. Sorry. What is Michigan doing? Michigan has been doing a really good job this year of examining whether it would be able to join without legislation. The Governor's Task Force on SARA has determined in the last few weeks that they need to draft legislation, and that legislation is being drafted. The goal would be to introduce it in the fall and hopefully begin to set up the portal agency in the spring and be open for business in the summer of 2015. What about some of the southern or northeastern states? We do have states in both of those regions that are talking about SARA. They are moving on a very different timeline. They have a different set of concerns in those states that doesn't make it quite as easy for them to join as the western states and the Midwestern states. The big thing in the South being, of course, that they have the electronic classroom. And so they already have something that works, and it's a little bit harder of a transition. It's a little more complex there. What about eastern states like Pennsylvania? Pennsylvania is looking very heavily at joining SARA and probably doing that through MEC. In fact, I have regular conversations with leaders of the educational institutions and the Department of Education in Pennsylvania. What about Massachusetts? Massachusetts is one of the states that it's going to take a longer time for them to come on board. And there's a mixture of opinions in Massachusetts there, but I wouldn't look for them to join anytime soon. Will the portal agencies eventually be listed along with the approved institutions on the NC SARA pages for the individual approved states? Lisa, can you answer that? Is that something we're planning?
Yes, we are planning that. We're collecting that information on the portal agencies, and we're listing the institutions as they are approved.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, next question. I understand that the Minnesota legislature gave authorization to the Office of Higher Education recently to join SARA, but they have not decided whether to join yet or not. Is that correct? Well, I don't know. The last conversation I had with them, they were working on their guidelines and working on their application. That's one I'll have to follow up on later. All right, my optometry school does not teach any distance courses, but we do send students to academic quarter-long externships to receive clinical training in different states by our adjunct faculty. Does SARA apply to us? Absolutely. In fact, yours is just the type of school that we see SARA being very, very helpful for. Let's see. For documentation of HLC accreditation status, is it enough to send the statement of affiliation status? Yes. Do I know the status of the legislation in Ohio? I've addressed that. I don't know precisely, but I can find out shortly. What is the latest Department of Education position on the acceptance of SARA for state authorization purposes? They seem to be publishing more guidelines and more rules. Alan, do you want to talk about that for a moment?
We don't have a definitive statement from the department that has SARA's name on it, but it is quite clear that they are interested in the kind of reciprocity agreement that we are doing. There has been no suggestion from anyone there that SARA will not meet the requirements that they are looking at, and they are clearly supportive of the basic idea. So I don't think there's any big issue there. There was a question from someone about what happens if there's a change of administration, and does that change what the feds are likely to do? It may, but in practical terms, what this is all about is an agreement among states regarding state regulations, and the federal government does not really have a great alternative, so I don't really see any problems in that area for the long term.
Thank you, Alan. Mary just looked up. It looks like the governor did sign the legislation in Ohio on June 5th. Thank you, Mary. Hopefully that gives you a little bit more. So now it's going to be up to Shane DeGarmo and the Board of Education and the Board of Regents there to continue working on the development of their portal agency. So thank you to Tim Peterson. Is he the one who told us about Ohio? Thank you, Tim. Okay, let's see. What happens if the financial score is higher one year and lower in another year? Well, I think it's going to depend on how much higher or lower. Let's have some of our portal people tell us how they would handle that. Ross or Tanya, how would you handle that? Ross, Tanya?
Yes, I'll go ahead. I think what we would do, we haven't run across that yet, we would probably ask for their financial status over the past year performed by an outside accounting agency to be turned in to us.
I would agree with that as well. There's independent auditor reports that provide financial statements of the institution, and we can see a lot from that, how stable the institution is. I agree with him.
All right, thank you. There's another question. It says the financial scores are from 2010, 2011. Is there any place we can obtain more current information? You know, I'm not necessarily aware of where we can get more up-to-date scores.
I think that is the most up-to-date, yes.
Okay, thank you, Ross. Yeah, I think there is a lag time there.
Yes, there is.
Okay. So we have people wanting an update on the status of Wisconsin. Wisconsin has a group of education and political leaders that have been meeting regularly for probably almost a year now to discuss what's going to happen in Wisconsin with SARA. And the last time I had a conversation with one of our leaders in Wisconsin on this issue, she indicated to me that they are meeting again, or maybe have met just recently, and are trying to move forward on figuring out how to designate a portal agency in Wisconsin. The last stage of talks I had heard about indicated that Wisconsin might be one of those states that's setting up a new entity to do this, and as you can imagine, that's much harder than enhancing an existing entity, so it is going to take them a little bit longer. I'm not really sure when we can say Wisconsin would come online. I would hope that if they're setting up an entity and we can provide some support for that endeavor, especially as we have more examples from other states that are doing that maybe we could get some type of legislation introduced in early 2015. Is there any word on Texas? All of the states that are not in WICHE or MEC, I will go through and send little updates after I check with the directors there after this PowerPoint, and that'll be part of the document we'll be sending out. What paperwork is needed to document the financial responsibility score? Okay, Ross and Tanya, what do you want?
What are you referring to exactly?
To document your financial responsibility score, what type of document would you want an institution to attach to the application?
Well, in the case of Indiana, we would go to the federal website and look up that score.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it could just be perhaps a disclosure of the score, and if it is a low score, an acknowledgement of that, and then attaching the documentation that it would require. If you have the 1.5 or above, probably just noting it on there would be fine. Does that sound right,
yes.
Ross and Tanya?
Yes, just noting it on the application, and we're going to verify that anyway. So we're going to the website to look at each one. Each one is listed so we would know what it is. Everyone would actually know what that score would be.
Right. Okay. I have another question here. If students are enrolled in a university in one state but complete an internship in another state, do we need to have state authorization for internship at that site in the state? The answer is probably maybe yes. It depends on the state and the type of internship. Especially if it's something leading to professional licensure, you probably also have to deal with the licensure board in that state as well. It's a good bet that if you're doing anything in the state physically, you will trigger some type of physical presence. Now, it's not universal. Some states don't, but you definitely should be checking on that. I would, we did cover this in the April 14th webinar, which is on YouTube. You could go back and take a look at that in the attached materials. We had a section on that. There states you could predict will elect not to join SARA? Alan, how would you respond to that?
A nice dump and run, Jenny. I think there are going to be a small number of states that are very slow to come in. I would be surprised if 3-4 years from now, if there are states that are simply not participating at all. My expectation right now is that you may see 4, 5, 6 states that are not members by the end of 2015 or the middle of 2016, but I'd be surprised if we aren't above 40 members by the end of 2015.
All right. Thank you, Alan. I've got one last question, and then all of the remaining we will be answering within 48 hours, and that'll come to you in a document with the recorded PowerPoint. This last question is, will the data gathering cover only those in degree programs and not individuals who wish to take a single course? Well, that's actually one of the definitions and one of the finer points that the National Council really wants us to nail down so that the data gathering is much easier on the institutions and not subject to misinterpretation and inconsistent reporting. So kind of maybe yes, no is my answer there, but there will be specifics of that forthcoming in the fall, and that would be part of my SARA update in the fall. Thank you to all my co-presenters. Thank you to everyone who tuned in today. You're now in our Customer Relations Management database, and we will keep you updated on all manners of information, SARA and state authorization related. All right, have a great Wednesday. Bye.
Great job.